Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, March 12th, 2020, and today we're going to be discussing how Bernie Sanders can regain momentum and put himself back in the lead moving forward through this 2020 Democratic primary race. Now, the numbers are not looking too good for Bernie Sanders. Though he looks like he's only behind a couple, about 150 delegates, 100 or so, it still is very much an uphill battle for Bernie Sanders. Moving ahead to these upcoming primary states next Tuesday, if they do hold these primaries, are not going to be positive for him. Though there is a debate on Sunday, not much is going to change in terms of how those states feel about him, and any type of momentum gained by the debate will be immediately cut off at the start of all of these primaries, considering most of them are going to be called at poll closing. The upcoming states are Arizona, Florida, Illinois, and Ohio. The Northern Mariana Islands are happening before on March 14th, but they only have 6 delegates, but still impactful to this race if it does come down to the wire. But Arizona, Florida, Illinois, and Ohio, they all have over 100 delegates at stake except for Arizona. Arizona only has 67. But despite that, Florida is a huge prize for both campaigns. Looking at where the map is starting to draw its lines, it looks like Florida may be the best bet for Joe Biden, and Arizona is the best bet for Bernie Sanders. Florida right now, it's almost assumed that Bernie Sanders is going to do horrible there, and Joe Biden has a greater than 99% chance of winning there, according to 538, and it looks like the margin might actually be over 30% to possibly 40% based off opinion polling. Just for a reference, if we take the current poll that we see right now, it gives Joe Biden around 63, so let me move this down a little bit more, compared to Bernie Sanders at 22% statewide. If you look at that, I mean, that completely expands the delegate lead for Vice President Biden, and it starts to put him in the 1,000 mark. Now, both of these candidates are probably going to be over 1,000 after this next upcoming Tuesday, but if Bernie Sanders is not, it doesn't look too great for him moving forward. But talking about where he can actually do well. So let's assume that this is the map we move into going on next Tuesday. Bernie Sanders is phenomenal at the debate, enough to turn the tides of the Democratic race. Let's say that happens. Well, these races that are occurring, number one, an area that he definitely could be focusing on a little bit more is Illinois and Ohio. I mean, these are areas that he definitely did a little bit better than he is poised to do right now in 2016. In the state of Illinois and Ohio, Hillary Clinton did win both of them. However, if you take a look at the overall area itself, that is a better area for Bernie Sanders, just moving around and taking a closer look. In the state of Illinois, Hillary Clinton barely won with 50.6% of the vote compared to 48.6%. Now, if Sanders is able to replicate that, that actually stops Joe Biden from moving forward by as big as a margin as he's expected to get. Joe Biden is poised to win all of these states by 20% or more, disregarding Arizona. And Arizona is still expected to be a Joe Biden victory. If Bernie Sanders can come within that and possibly win some of these states, that's where that momentum comes from. As for the state of Ohio, it wasn't the closest state. Hillary Clinton won here by around 13% statewide, but let's say Bernie Sanders somehow pulls off an upset. Let's say he carries 51% of the delegates in the state of Illinois, and Joe Biden gets the rest. Yes, the margin may not have changed much because they're getting the same amount of delegates, but we're starting to see a little bit more of Bernie Sanders blue on the map. Let's say Bernie Sanders actually ties in the state of Ohio with Joe Biden, and let's say Illinois, Bernie Sanders is a little bit better, winning 60 to 40. Which isn't too far out from what could actually be a real possibility. Though Illinois is supposed to go to Joe Biden, it was very close in 2016 and was not really expected to do so. And he also has a very good advantage in terms of winning back white working class voters. Joe Biden just has this momentum right now that seems to be unstoppable. But if Bernie Sanders is able to do this, then the Biden campaign is going to stop focusing on Donald Trump and refocus on the 2020 campaign. So let's say, just for the sake of coloring it in blue, Biden gets one less delegate than Bernie Sanders in Ohio. That narrows up the race to be within 120 delegates. Now, the math isn't looking super nice, but if you take a look, let's say Sanders wins in Arizona by, let's say, 10% or 20%, around the same margin as Nevada, except a little bit narrower. So that puts Biden and Sanders within about 100 of each other. Now, Florida, we already know, is going to be a blowout. It's going to be really, really hard for Bernie Sanders to move forward from the state of Florida. It's just how the numbers are supposed to go right now. But let's say Sanders does get a little bit more of the vote than expected. Let's say around 33% compared to 67%. Now, I know that really pushes Biden even further, expands the delegate number, but it does make it a little bit better than just barely being viable in a number of these areas. Moving ahead to Georgia, well, that's Biden territory, but let's say it narrows up. A lot of things are going to have to work really well for Bernie Sanders in order to move ahead and still build a contested convention. But looking at these delegate numbers, it's not impossible for Bernie Sanders. There are some bigger prizes down the road that definitely have promising results for Bernie Sanders. Moving past Georgia, Puerto Rico could possibly be a Sanders territory. I think after all that's happened right now, it is possible Bernie Sanders pulls it off. Let's say he narrowly wins there, but here's where he's actually going to start getting a little bit more larger statewide wins. In Alaska, we could probably expect roughly the same margin. Same thing in Hawaii that we saw back in 2016, which are just going to start building momentum because you're going to see the state calls regardless of how many delegates they have. If Bernie Sanders has a winning streak, the same thing happened in 2016. It sort of slowed down the race. Bernie Sanders had 7 victories consistently, and though they may not have been the biggest victories, they were still victories regardless, and it started to seem like Hillary Clinton was lacking in terms of numbers. Same thing. Let's say we start to see 2016 replicating itself in some of these states. Wisconsin hitting. Bernie Sanders won the state of Wisconsin back in 2016. Let's say it's 58 to 42 margin. That starts to narrow up the race and leaves only a certain number of areas for the rest of these people to go. Now, this isn't a pathway for Bernie Sanders to win the nomination outright. I'm not saying that is going to happen because it's not. As of right now, it doesn't look like that's going to happen unless something drastic changes nationwide. But Bernie Sanders can very well get to a contested convention. If we keep filling out the rest of these states, let's say Sanders has a good showing in the state of New York, as he pretty much did in 2016. It wasn't the best showing, but still a showing regardless. Let's say it's around 45-55, mimicking what we saw at the end of the 2016 primary in all of these states. Well, I understand Joe Biden is going to do a little bit better, but it is possible if we take states like West Virginia and you move them up and it starts to see like it's going to be the same thing that we saw in 2016. It is possible that Bernie Sanders does get close enough to make this a contested convention. And then moving ahead from there, possibly getting more pledged delegates than Joe Biden. That would take a win in states that he actually won before: Oregon, Kansas, Nebraska, I guess Indiana, New Hampshire, which he already characterized. But just looking at some of the states, it is very possible that Bernie Sanders leads into a contested convention if he is able to turn around the, move of momentum at the upcoming debate this Sunday. Unfortunately for Bernie Sanders, not many people are going to be tuning into this debate. It's going to be completely trounced by the whole, scare of coronavirus, and people probably aren't going to be as invested in the Democratic primary as they were before, just plainly out of being scared. But just saying, if the momentum somehow does change, Bernie Sanders could start to replicate his 2016 map, which could lead to a contested convention. And in turn, let's say the superdelegates want to swing in favor of Bernie Sanders this time, it's going to help him clinch the nomination if we see anything like that possible. Unfortunately, again, for Bernie Sanders, a lot is going to have to happen in order for that to occur. Realistically, we do know that Bernie Sanders is probably only going to get around 27% of the vote, somewhere around there, a little bit below 30% in the state of Florida. We know that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are probably not going to have too close of a match in both of these states. Joe Biden is probably going to end up winning both Ohio and Illinois. Arizona seems to be the best bet for Bernie Sanders, but after victories for Joe Biden in Texas, in looking around the area and just pretty much the past mini Tuesday, I wouldn't call it Super Tuesday 2. I guess it is, but I'm just going to call it mini Tuesday to avoid confusion. Washington State is still coming in, and it looks like it's going to be a Biden victory just because a lot of the early vote seems to be tied. And since a lot of that is going to probably, the current vote right now is tied, it does look like Joe Biden might end up winning a little bit more later on. It doesn't look like Bernie Sanders is having as strong of a coalition as he had before. But that does not mean it's impossible for a contested convention to happen. Yes, a lot is going to have to happen, but a lot does happen normally. This seems like a stretch because I'm filling out all of these states at once. But once you start to see candidates like either Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders pick up states, there's a reason why momentum works. If Sanders is winning in Wyoming, in Alaska, in Hawaii, in Arizona, in Illinois, in Ohio, when you start to see that trend, then a lot of other states are going to take a step back and reevaluate the entire Democratic primary process and start to think, well, maybe I can vote for Bernie Sanders. Some people are even voting for Joe Biden because they don't think Bernie Sanders has a chance at the nomination. And at this point in time, it doesn't look super likely, but it is still possible. And that's not my, internal bias. That's literally just because looking at the math, it doesn't look too comfortable for Bernie Sanders. A lot is going to have to work in his favor, but I'm not going to say that is impossible, because if you look at the start after Iowa and Nevada and New Hampshire, a lot looked very good for Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden just practically came out of nowhere and came out with a comeback, but we aren't so sure if he's going to be the nominee yet. So filling in the rest of these states could be very, very interesting. I'm not going to go ahead and do that now. I will be updating my upcoming predictions for next Tuesday, probably tomorrow. But just letting you guys know, I am officially off school for the next 2 weeks until March 30th due to the coronavirus. So make sure you guys wash your hands for 20 seconds, stay safe, stay indoors. And yeah, so you're probably going to see a little bit more content from me than usual, possibly 2 uploads a day, and possibly some election nights, which I haven't dabbled in a while. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.